Look, on Monday's episode, I talked a lot about the Boston Celtics. Again, we only get to talk about 3 things. We talked about the Celtics, the Nuggets, and what was our third thing? Oh, the Toronto Raptors. I want to talk about the Eastern Conference right now. I said this on Monday. It feels like the Boston Celtics have separated themselves, not just in the standings, but with how they're playing right now. I do think there's a number of teams that we can make an argument for or speculate could still win the Eastern Conference. So I want to get into all this. I want to actually start with the Milwaukee Bucks. They are 5-7 since Doc Rivers took over, but the defense is trending in the right direction. They are 10th in defense since Doc took over, and their offense has gone the other way. They're 21st in offense. But here's what I'm excited about: their pick and roll defense. They were a bottom 10 team in pick and roll under Adrian Griffin. They are a top 5 team in pick and roll on defense. And you know what it comes down to? They are switching almost 25% more, actually more than 25% more. They're switching on defense more in pick and roll, which I find fascinating.
Is it more the switching? Because I was going to ask about this, just the half-court D in general. Is it more the switching and less where they're putting Brook?
Well, here's what's interesting. So Brook primarily is still in a drop and all that stuff. But here's what's interesting. If you think about the philosophy around trying to create turnovers, right? The ball, and the numbers back this up, the ball is going to get by the defender more if you're not creating those turnovers, right? Their blow-by percentage went up. What happens on a blow-by? What happens in a pick and roll where there's not pressure on the ball? You end up in rotation. And so if you're switching and you're staying on the ball and you're playing a flatter defense, there's not as many opportunities to put 2 on the ball and then be in rotation. Think about all the time, especially early on. Like, I don't want to belabor this point, but they were 40 feet away from the basket, putting 2 on the ball in pick and roll. And that led to 4-on-3s. So it's a simpler defense. They're switching with the right personnel at a much higher rate. I'm a firm believer that if this team defensively is good enough, they don't have to be great, and they've been pretty damn good since Doc took over. If they're good enough, offensively, Doc's gonna figure out how to maximize this offense. He did that with the Clippers team. He did that with James and Joel. He's going to figure out how to maximize this offense at some point.
And you're betting on 2 Hall of Famers,
of course,
and Chris Middleton. I mean, these are guys that are going to be able to get there. The numbers. I wanted to shout out Nathan Marzione, who covers the Bucks. He did a big breakdown on Brook in particular today. Milwaukee has a 102 defensive rating when Brook is playing since the firing. Lopez has a 43.7 field goal percentage against him in this window. It was 48% before.
He's 3rd for the season in opponent field goal percentage in the restricted area. 3rd in the entire NBA. He's having a great defensive year.
Yeah.
It's not reflected overall in the team numbers, but Brook, by and large, has been Brook.
So I wanted to ask about the Knicks as well, because the Knicks are 23-2 versus teams below 500, and they're 12-21 against teams that are above 500. And I'm not saying the Knicks don't have a shot to, make a run in the Eastern Conference or whatever it is. But with a team like Milwaukee, whenever they play a top team, you see it, they go and they smack Denver, they smack Minnesota the other night. Whenever they play a top team, you see what they can be. And so is there something with this team a little bit of like they've been there before and they're taking too many games off because they know that they are they know that they have the ability to turn it on once it gets to early May, mid-May?
Well, here's how I would look at it. I think when they were 30-13 under Griffin, it didn't feel visually like they were a really good basketball team. So despite the fact that they were winning, it didn't feel and look like a really good basketball team. They win their first game with an interim coach. Then Doc comes in, they're 5-7 since. And I'll say this, Doc did take over in the middle of the season. He did take over in the middle of a road trip. That's hard to do. It's obviously hard to do. I think there was a little bit of an overreaction to the Bucks as title contenders. You think back to opening week of the season, them and the Boston Celtics had the best odds, plus 180, both to win the Eastern Conference. Celtics sit at plus 115 right now, and the Bucks are at plus 700, which is the 3rd best odds. I'm looking at the Bucks and I'm thinking to myself, this is easily a team that can not only win the Eastern Conference, but win an NBA championship. They have Giannis and they have Dame. They have a guy who's won a championship as a coach. Brook has been great. Chris Middleton has been great. Malik Beasley has shot the share of the ball. Their starting lineup for this season, not under Doc, not under Griffin, not under Prunty, for this season has like a net rating of like 15. They're a fucking good team.
Let me ask you about the Boston matchup. We don't want to get too much into it because you just covered it on Monday, but we've talked ad nauseum about Porzingis and the impact that he's had.
Yeah.
With Porzingis in particular and this defense humming at Bud levels, how do you think they would approach a matchup like Porzingis in the playoffs? Because that's obviously something that they haven't had to face before, and it's we haven't seen them play them since the new regime. So it's like where they're gonna sort of approach this differently with him.
They'd cross match. They'd put Giannis on Porzingis, switch across the board there, and they'd put Brook Lopez on Drew, which a number of teams have done this season. The only thing with that, we talked about this the other day. Drew has had sort of a different experience game to game. When he played for Milwaukee, he was the primary ball handler. He was a shot creator. He was a distributor, but he had the ball in his hands. This has been a different thing for him. Depending on matchups, he's been a spacer, and he's shot the shit out of the ball this year, but he's been a spacer at times. He's over in the corner. Sometimes he's a screener. He's not the primary guy, right? Joe Mazzulla and the Boston Celtics know this. He's the guy that a lot of teams are cross-matching the big on, so that they can switch with Porzingis. Now, the only thing with that I'll say, again, is that when Kristaps Porzingis gets a mismatch, he's having the most efficient post-up season in NBA history. Well, in the tracking era of the NBA, going back to 2013, 2014. So you still run into some issues. It's not like, we're going to switch across the board and all our issues against the Boston Celtics are solved. There's still a lot to be done. But I think to answer your question, that's how they would start that series, I would assume, is just cross-matching.
The net rating stuff with Porzingis is crazy. The Porzingis Tatum White 15.2, Porzingis Brown White 14.9. Like,
they're good. Doing the game the other day, it's like they can always have like 2 or 3 guys that are just all-stars on the floor. Like that's how deep they are. You know what I mean? It's like, we're gonna take Brown and Tatum out. Okay, we can still put Al Horford, Derek White, Porzingis, Sam Hauser, Drew Holiday. It's like, it's crazy.
It's probably too early to have this conversation as it's, February, but when you look back at the Porzingis trade and you look at the fact that they got the only 2 first-round picks in that trade plus him, are we gonna look back at that and be like, this is one of the more lopsided trades in recent NBA history?
There's a good chance. I don't know the specifics of the Memphis pick situation and which year they are and how they're protected. I do know that Memphis was holding on to a lot of picks, and it was a 3-team deal, right? So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So again, I said this on the broadcast the other night. I think Brad Stevens knows what he's doing.
Maybe don't trade Brad Stevens.
I think he knows what he's doing.